Right, good day. This video is going to show you just the basic setup from absolute scratch of a database in Delphi. We're going to be focusing on setting up an SQL database, but most of the steps here also apply if you are using just normal tables, TBL components. So here we have my folder in which I'm going to save this program. I have a database over here called Edward Shop. Right, so that's where we're starting with. Nothing except the database. Here I have Delphi open. We're going to start by creating a new Windows VCL application. Alright, there we go. Let's just close the welcome page. So here's our VCL page, empty. You can see at the moment it's called Unit 1 because it hasn't been saved and it doesn't have a name. Before we do that, because we are working with databases, I'm going to go to File, New, Other. If I look for the database folder, we can see Data Module. Okay, there we go. Now we have a data module, and this is where we're going to be saving our database related objects on. So you can see Unit 1, Unit 2. Let's save this first and foremost. And let's make sure that we save it the proper way. File, save all. Okay, we don't want to click save or save as or save project as. From scratch, save all. There's several different things that need to be saved. So I'm going to go to my folder over here. There it is. Actually, that's not that one. This one over here. My temp folder. It says that it's empty, even though we know the database is there. It's because it's only looking for a specific type of file, the data unit. Now, when we click Save All, the computer is going to ask us to save 3 things one after another. To name it correctly and to know what you're saving is important. So we can see here by the Save As type, it's looking for a Delphi unit. When you click Save All and you're saving multiple different items, it's always going to ask you to save the units first, then at the end it'll ask you to save the project file. So we can confirm that here, save as data Delphi unit. Alright, what Delphi unit are we saving? Because I have 2 over there, Unit 1 and Unit 2. Unit 1 is the default name here, so it's referring to Unit 1. I know that Unit 1 is my VCL Forms application, so I'm going to go ahead and call that Edward Shop underscore U. That's my main unit, right? My VCL application. Save. And by the way, underscore U, I always end with that to show that this is a unit file that you're saving. Alright, now that that one's saved, immediately the next one pops up automatically. It's looking for another Delphi unit. The default name is Unit 2. That must mean it's talking about the data module. Right, so because I know that, I need to give it an appropriate name. I'm going to start with DM for data module. Edward Shop. So the same name, just with DM in front, underscore U, because it's also a unit. Save. And there's the third and final one that we were expecting. Now I can see by Save As type, it's looking for a Delphi project. Right, there should only be one Delphi project. If it's asking for more, then there's a mistake somewhere. Right, many units, but only one project. So I'm going to call it Edward Shop underscore P so that I know it's a project file. Save. There we go. Now that we know our program is saved correctly, we can continue. Right, a bit of a side note. If you open up Delphi from scratch and you want to open up your project again, File, you can see that there's some options here, open project, etc. Please, you want to open up a Delphi project from scratch the first time, you always say open project. If you say open, you're going to get a lot of options to open. It's going to ask you, you're going to be able to open up any of the units. And if you do that, your program is not going to run. The project file must be opened up. Once your project file is open like this, on the right hand side you'll be able to see all the different units attached, and if they're not there, you just double click on it and it will open it up for you. Alright, so that is the correct way to save and open up a Delphi project. That goes for any grade, any project. Right, now let's get on with it. So first I'm going to look for TADO connection. TADO connection, there it is. Right. Before I name it, I'm going to put all three. There's going to be 3 items. Next one is TADO query. TADO query. Click on it, put it over there. There's our second one. And the last one is a T data source. T data source. And there it is. I like to put it in this order because they connect to each other from left to right, or from right to left. Okay, let's start with the connection. This is the item that is connecting to our database. Without this guy, we won't be able to connect to the database at all. So I'm going to move to the connection string property and click on the little 3 dots on the side. Right, we are going to use the bottom option, use connection string build. Right, now these different options are used for different versions of database and Delphi and whatnot. We're going to go with the first one, so it's easy to remember, Microsoft Jet. Right, it's the only one that says Microsoft Jet, so you shouldn't forget that. Next. Right, now this bar over here, we're going to go find our project. So I'm going to click on the 3 dots and I'm going to go find my project. Right, so you navigate through the folders till you get to the folder where your project is saved. Yeah, I see that it's on the correct one already, and I'm looking for Edward Shop. So I'm going to click on Edward Shop, open. These 2 you can leave blank unless you have a username and a password installed that protects that database, like a password entry. But if you don't know about that, then it's not there. Right, so just leave it as it is. Let's click on test connection to make sure that we found our database. There we go. Our test connection has succeeded. You click OK and OK. Now that that's connected, let's give this let's give this object a proper name. By default, it says ADO connection 1. Okay, that's not a proper name. So let's move. Right, I'm going to start by writing con in small letters. This is the 3-letter prefix that we have before every single object that we place when we name it to know what object it is. So this is a con for connection. Then I'm going to name it after the database, Edward Shop, because I'm connecting to the Edward Shop database. There we go. That's done. Next one, our ADO query 1 component, right? So let's connect it. We're going to connect the query component to the connection component. So to do that, we look for the connection property. There is a drop-down menu. If your connection, your con Edward Shop object was properly configured, it will appear over here and you simply have to click on it. Now it's connected. We still need to give it a good name, so let's scroll down to name. ADO query 1 is not a good name. Because this is a query component, I'm going to start with my prefix of QRY, which is short for query. Now this query component differs from the table component in that we're not going to name it after a specific table in the database. We're going to name it after the entire table, the entire database. So Edward Shop. This is because a query component can connect to multiple tables at once in a database, right? So it makes no point really to name it after a specific table. And that's it for the query components. Last but not least, the data source. The data source connects to the query component. So we're going to look for the dataset property over here and another drop-down list. If our query Edward Shop component is correctly configured, then this drop-down list will have it over here, and you simply need to click on it. Okay. This data source is the window from your database to your DB grid, which we will do in a few minutes. Right, now let's give this a proper name. Data source 1 is not a proper name. So the name property, I'm going to start with DS. That's my prefix for data source. Edward Shop. There we go. So it's also named after the database. Alright, so those are our 3 components done. There's one thing that I did forget, so let me mention it now. Our data module itself, okay, the unit of it where it's stored is called DM Edward Shop _U. We named it that when we saved it. However, inside the program, if you click anywhere here on a blank spot on the data module, we can go and give it a name over here as well. By default, it's data module 2. Okay, we know that's not a good name. So I'm going to call it DM Edward Shop. For some simplistic reasons, I'm just calling it after or naming it after the database that we're connecting to. But that isn't the general, or isn't the only rule. You may have a case on a more advanced program where you have connections to multiple databases, but we're not doing that here, not at school level at least, so DM Edward Shop will suffice. Okay, we're done with the data module now. Let's move over to our form, which is empty. So the first thing we're going to place over here is a database grid. So DBG or TDBG, there we go, TDB grid. Let's place it and make it a bit bigger. First things first, let's give it a name. So here on the property list, by name, DBG is our prefix, stands for database grid. Now usually you would call your database grid, you would name it after the table or the query component that you plan on using to connect to it. Right? So that's just going to be DBG Edward Shop. The only other thing you have to do for this DB grid is, if we look for the data source property, it's another drop-down list, data source, but we're going to see now that it's blank. That's because it doesn't know of the data module yet. Right? These 2 units, they might be in the same project, but they don't know of each other. So to fix that, in our main form, Edward Shop _U, under the section uses, we have to add. So after the last one there, I'm going to add a comma, and I'm going to add the name of the unit of the data module, which is DM Edward Shop _U, as it's saved. Right? You might get some funny errors, some red squiggly lines. That usually happens the first time you open up a program from scratch. But if I just save my progress, it should fix most of it up. Take that. There you go. There's some weird errors here sometimes, but that's sorted. Now let's try this again. So I'm clicking on my DBG, my grid. Let's look for the data source property, and there it is. Right, DM Edward Shop, referring to the data module where it's stored, dot DS Edward Shop. So that's the data source we're looking for. There we go. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. It's set up now. If you have to, using code or using this query component directly, add some SQL code, activate it, you will see the results in here automatically.